turn it around and say, I know you can do this. I want to help you participate and do your personal best today and to make a good choice. And to find things that are positive about what that child's able to do. And for some kids, it's just standing on their carpet square and not bothering people around them and holding their violin and trying to do a couple of exercises. And other kids, it's, the sky's the limit. To be able to work with that structure and to pull these kids up and give them the ability to say, I can do this. And I can withstand any number of problems and know how to solve them and approach it positively. And if I can bring that to those kids for 30 minutes, I'm gold.
Welcome to Director's Circle, a podcast featuring insight from music educators and school leaders discussing their philosophies on the administrative leadership of a comprehensive music program. I'm Doug Conrad, and today's guest is Dr. Brenda Brenner from Bloomington, Indiana. Let's begin. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Director's Circle. I'm Doug Conrad. Thank you so much for tuning in. Before we begin, I would like to thank all of you for listening and also for all of your support in helping our show reach new listeners over the past few weeks. Just in the past few weeks alone, we have seen a larger number in the amount of likes and subscriptions on our social media accounts, as well of the number of downloads per episode for the show. And that would not be possible without all of your help out there, and especially over social media with those of you that share the page on Facebook, share different episodes or whatnot. And I just wanted to take a moment and thank you. If you haven't done so already, and if you would like to stay up to date on all things with our show, please head on over to Facebook, like our page under Director's Circle, go to YouTube under Director's Circle Podcast, and also make sure to subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, or now Spotify to stay updated on all future episodes. Today's guest is a very special person, as aside from being an outstanding music educator, she is also an astounding musician as well. Today's guest is Dr. Brenda Brenner, and Dr. Brenner is the Associate Professor of Music in Music Education at Indiana University Jacobs School of Music. As Director of the Fairview Project, a project in which every first and second grader in an underserved school is taught violin as part of the curriculum, Dr. Brenner is researching the cognitive, academic, and social outcomes of early instrumental music education. Additionally, she is an active international clinician with recent appearances at the Midwest Band and Orchestra Clinic, American String Teachers Association national conferences, and music educator conferences throughout the United States. She is also a past president of the American String Teachers Association. Hello, Dr. Brenner. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Doug. It's a pleasure to be a guest on your program.
For sure. Glad to have you here. So to start off, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional background?
My current job is Associate Professor of Music Education with a string emphasis at Indiana University Jacobs School of Music. I've been here this is my 27th year, where I've done a whole variety of different positions, including I actually am currently also the co-director of the Indiana University String Academy, which is a program for pre-college students where I teach applied violin to children ages 5 through 18 and do orchestra and group classes for them as well. And in 2006, I went into the music ed world here at IU with the string emphasis. So mostly what I do here is teach applied violin to the music education majors and head up the string area of the music education department. I'm also currently serving as the music education department chairman. And I have a program, we'll probably talk about it later, called the Fairview Project, which is a collaborative adventure between Jacobs School, the Summer Star Foundation for Nature, Arts, and Humanity out of Boston, and the Jacobs School, as well as the Fairview Elementary School, where I teach with the help of many IU students classes for underserved students, ages, first through sixth grade at a local school. So we'll probably talk about that a little more. And then in addition, I also am finishing up my last year on the board of the American String Teachers Association, where I was president from 2016 through 2018. So it's a 6-year term where you sit on the board and lead the direction of that particular organization.
Oh, that's certainly a lot. So getting back to your academic roots when you were still a student, your master's and doctorate degrees are both in music performance, correct?
Yeah, actually, I have 4 degrees. I have 2 degrees from Wichita State University, which is where I grew up in Wichita and was lucky enough to be a part of that, I think, really unique musical community. So I got a bachelor's in music education and performance way back in, I think I finished in 1984, so that ages me, but that was a really interesting community to be from, because I grew up with the Wichita Symphony. I played in the Wichita Symphony during my undergraduate years, and it was a community where most of my teachers, my music teachers, throughout my primary and secondary schools, also were performers in the orchestra. So I saw music education and music performance as something that was the same, that everybody played and everybody taught. So I didn't distinguish necessarily between those two areas. Then I went on after my undergraduate education to the Eastman School in Rochester, New York, where I got a master's and a doctorate in violin performance. I did a lot of work, particularly in my doctorate in chamber music, where my quartet won the Cleveland Quartet competition, which was basically a free education and some intensive work with the world-renowned Cleveland Quartet. So I was able to play, I think we did probably about 25 concerts every year, and really focused in on the string quartet literature. So I think I learned a lot about teaching from that experience as well in my doctorate.
So now, with your degrees in performance, whenever you graduated with your doctorate, did you always want to pursue a career in music education, or was that something that maybe came later after you graduated?
You know, it was funny just looking back on it, and especially in the situation that I'm currently in, where I'm advising and mentoring students between the ages of 18 and on up through the doctoral level. I ask them often in the mentoring process, you know, what jazzes you? Like, what are you excited about? You know, what makes you feel good? And if I look back in my own experience, for sure, I remember just in undergraduate just being so excited to be in front of groups of kids and to play and to talk to them about music and to teach. And really through my undergraduate career, I taught every weekend. I taught every evening. I had a lot of private students, but I also loved to be in front of a group of students. So it was something that I was always excited about. I loved to perform as well, but I would say that teaching private lessons in particular has been something that I've done from the time I was in high school, throughout all the schooling that I did and beyond. When I went to Eastman, it was not a community where, you know, people said, you know, my goal is to be in the public schools. It was, there were definitely silos in that community where you went there and you were in a performance degree and your goal was to be in an orchestra or a quartet or to have a higher ed job. So I would say that, you know, during that period of my life, I was less focused on, you know, public school teaching, but it's something that I've always felt strongly about, and that I want the best possible teachers to be in the public schools, and I feel that, it's something that I've always enjoyed doing. I've never taught full-time in the public schools. People ask me, why didn't you? And it's, well, I got a doctorate. I went immediately after the doctorate into a higher ed position at Carleton College in Minnesota. And then 4 years later, I came to IU. So I just was, on a different path. I've always had my fingers in group classes here at IU, where it's not public school teaching, but it's a version of teaching groups and being with kids. I've worked with orchestras all along, either a regular orchestra through the String Academy or Summer String Academy, or I've also done a lot of guest conducting for honors groups and spent a lot of time just working with groups of children.
So now to elaborate a little bit on your position at IU, the unique thing about your position is that you can teach on what you could call both sides of the faculty spectrum, where, as you said, you have general classroom courses with music ed students, but also that you teach one-on-one private studio instruction with violin majors. So having taught on both sides of that spectrum, or in both those types of classrooms, what have you learned about music and about teaching in general?
I think that our music community tends to put people in silos of you're either a private teacher or you're a public school teacher. And, there are certain skills for both areas that are really necessary. But really the information is the same. And I spend a lot of time in my private teaching here at IU teaching pedagogy, because I think it's important for my students to have that experience of, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, this is how you might think about teaching this to students that you will have. So I'm really lucky that I'm working with students that are desiring that kind of information. I think that all performers should be teachers, and that all teachers should be performers of some sort. It doesn't mean that you have to be, as a public school teacher, out on the stage all the time performing, but you certainly, I feel that it's really important to have some experience preparing at a decent level pieces on your instrument, certainly experience playing in an ensemble, if that's the what you're doing in the public school, that's really, really important that you understand that process. I get a lot of kids here at IU. I teach the violin pedagogy course, and I always ask in the first class, how many of you are hoping to teach? It's at that point about 50% of the students start digging through their backpacks, or they're looking away from me because it's like, I'm not ever going to teach. I'm going to be in an orchestra, or I'm going to be on the concert stage, or I'm going to play in a quartet. And the reality of the world today is that we need a lot of really good string teachers. There's definitely I get at least 2 to 3 to 4 times the number of string jobs through my people contact me and say, I need a person for this position. Then I have students that are able to fill them. I have a 100% placement rate at IU. So every single one of my string kids get a job, and a good job. And then I could have, 3-4 times the class that I have and still fill all of the positions that come through my inbox. So I think it's really important in my current position to be almost a figurehead for public school education, and going out there and preparing people to be in that sort of position, because I think it's very powerful being able to teach and work with children at whatever level. It really has a huge impact on our world, and especially in music, because you typically see these kids for years in a row, unlike a math class where you might teach one semester or 1 year and then they're off and they're doing another level with a different teacher. You get to really know and impact these kids over a long period of time, and I think that's a really special and wonderful gift that we have as music teachers.
So to touch on that topic of pedagogy, I liked how you mentioned that with bringing that through your process with teaching students and kind of putting that in that context then of how you talked about with job placement for students. Let's say, hypothetically, if I'm one of your students and I'm in your violin studio, and maybe if I never got a string job just to start out my career, maybe I got hired, I moved to, let's say, West Virginia, and I'm a K through 6 elementary music general teacher. Even if it's not something specific to what they do on their primary instrument, as a private studio instructor for music education majors, are there any specific skills you want your students to possess before they enter the educational workforce?
So you're talking aside from violin skills. You're speaking about just general teaching skills. So if you're my student and I'm going to send you to a K through 6 general job, I think that you need to have a good idea of curriculum, what's important for your students to learn, and that, of course, these days is directly connected to standards, that you have a variety of ways of interacting with your students, that it's not a straight-ahead curriculum in the sense that, I think that you have to do this exercise and then this exercise. But I feel like for me, the really wonderful thing about teaching is that it's a creative process, that there are many ways to teach different skills, and it depends upon who you're teaching and what excites and motivates them. So for me, it's getting your finger on who you're teaching, what really gets them excited, and then drawing in materials and exercises and a curriculum that's going to really excite them and you as well. So something that's going to change from year to year. It may be the same basic ideas, but collecting materials, resources, and ideas from other people, much like you're doing right now, Doug, so that you have things to keep you going as a teacher as well.
In the instance, let's say if a student is really set and lands a job as a high school orchestra conductor, are there any specific skills, even just relative to their performance abilities, that you would want them to have before they went into the workforce?
Well, at the high school level, I will say just overall, my emphasis is on correct setup on the instrument. So how you approach the string instruments from a healthy perspective. So physically getting students set up correctly. I'm very systematic in terms of the use of the bow. I think that's very important, and especially at the high school level where you really want your students to play uniformly, like in a symphony orchestra. Then they have to have an understanding of the bow and the bow strokes. Certainly, I would want my students who are going out to lead the orchestras to have an understanding of how that process continues from the beginning through the more advanced stages, that it's not just we're done with the first year, so we're not ever going to deal with that again. But how does that look when you're teaching these students? So this can happen in the importance of the warm-ups, the importance of just still teaching fundamentals, despite the fact that in the high school orchestras, your curriculum is the repertoire. So how to choose repertoire to really build those skills is really important, and understanding a variety of different musical styles. So I think, again, depending upon where you're teaching, you would have students who are interested in a variety of different ways of playing. So you look at somebody like Bob Phillips with the fiddlers, you have mariachi in the Southwest. That's very popular. The strolling strings, I have a student who's out there doing a really bang-up job with strolling strings right now. So they need to have an understanding of how to teach all of those various styles.
So to kind of take this a little further with the performance component of a music educator, how important do you feel is your or one's own musicianship on their primary instrument in regards to their ability to teach ensembles?
Well, I think they're in some senses two separate skills. I think you have to put it in the perspective that here I am at the Jacobs School. So the students that I get here are, especially at the undergraduate level, they have to pass the performance requirements to get into the school and be accepted into a major studio. So no music ed students here study with a graduate student. Everyone studies with the artist faculty. So I'm spoiled in that perspective because all of our kids come in at a decent level. I think that it's important to have some good basic skills at sort of a rudimentary level. I think some of the best string teachers that I have witnessed are not string players, which is really interesting to me because I think that those students who are wind, brass, piano, percussion, don't take things for granted that my string students do. So their process is more detailed because they don't say, well, okay, how do you teach a G major scale? Well, you just play it. Of course, my string people know they play G major scale for an age. The wind brass players, they don't take that for granted. They understand what those differences are and are able to teach them sometimes more successfully. At the very highest level, I think the highest level orchestras that I have seen at the high school level have really consummate musicians at the helm. They're typically, if they're not string players, they have a great curiosity about string playing. They ask questions. They practice the string instruments so they understand the issues that their students are facing. They might not be virtuoso violinists, but they are really curious and are trying to further their knowledge always about teaching strings. So I think that's more important than being a really virtuoso player. I've had some really virtuoso players in my pedagogy classes who have been dismal in terms of their teaching because they just don't ask any questions. They assume knowledge rather than assume that someone's starting from scratch and these are the steps you have to go through. Because sometimes those people who are very gifted skipped a lot of those steps for whatever reason, and they don't have to. They find it tiresome to go back and teach those skills, which of course in a classroom situation is really important that you don't skip those steps.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting point, and that's one conversation I had with a friend once where he put that kind of debate in terms of cousins. They can be mutually exclusive where you can be an outstanding performer or an outstanding educator, but also with those two skills, they can work hand in hand, but sometimes too, if one is without the other, they can still do fine in whatever realm they're in. So to take that one step further now, being that you work in teacher training programs at IU and also with teaching in a private studio setting, is there anything that from your experience on both sides you feel that studio instructors could put more emphasis on for their students to thrive even more when they go out in the workforce?
Well, I mean, I think, for my music ed students, I mean, part of a lot of it is success, I think, is just having a vision of what you want to do in the world and going out and pursuing it, and the personality that you carry going into those situations where you really want to impact and be with a large group of students and teach them about music. I think that in the applied world, there has historically been an emphasis, at least I'll speak in terms of strings, of preparing students to win orchestra auditions or like something that's in the performance world. So in a typical violin lesson, you would do some foundational work with scales, arpeggios, double stops, etudes, and then you would really focus in on the solo repertoire. And the solo repertoire for an instrument like the violin is vast. So, you would teach, and I do this, I teach concertos and sonatas, show pieces. And what happens to these kids for the most part is that if you're in an applied performance major, that there is no focus for getting a position. These kids go from undergraduate to master's to doctorate, and they know all the concertos, and they can play sonatas. They do chamber music, but the practical application of these skills toward getting a performance job, they might take an orchestra rep class, but no one teaches the orchestra excerpts as a regular part of the lesson from the time these kids hit, freshman year. They don't prepare them for, if that's what the goal is. There are very few teachers who do that as a matter of course. I'm sure there are some, but for the most part, these kids are left on their own to prepare for these auditions. They also don't talk about the fact that, it's so amazing to me that these kids don't see their own artist teachers as teachers, that these people are doing teaching for a living, and that you basically might want to get some good pedagogical skills, some good interactive skills to understand how to teach the instrument from the very beginning through the artist level, is something that is, I think, really important for every student right from the get-go. So, if I were devising a curriculum, and I do this with my own students because I have a unique class here at IU where I can really focus in on the pedagogy, but I think that everybody needs to do that. And give a really strong understanding of why and how to teach the violin at various levels from the beginning. And I think then it would be a lot more successful in terms of people making a living and teaching well once they get out.
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely empathize with that. Even I remember when I was in college, a lot of things that our private studio instructor would always tell us. I'm a saxophone player, but one thing was always try to find as many young students to teach right now as possible, just even for the experience. Because I even remember, like they talked about, you can learn every way of how to describe the shape and all, I'm sure, but the actual time getting to know how to work with that age level especially was of the utmost importance, and I definitely appreciate that I took the time to do that definitely before entering teaching, but that's definitely good. So now to talk a little bit about what you do with the Fairview Project. It's a very special program, lots of good things going on, and it's a really unique opportunity for your music ed majors as well. So can you talk a little bit about that, an overview, and possibly how you got started with that a few years ago?
So I had some basic questions that kind of came out of a lot of the research that was coming out in the early 2000s, where the music makes you smarter. phase of music research where, people were saying, you would read almost every week in the news, it's important to play classical music for your child. It's important that they have these experiences because it will give them a lot of cognitive gifts, so to speak, as they move forward. And I remember going to an American String Teachers National Conference where they had a big video that proclaimed that, string players, kids who participated in string lessons in the public schools had higher SAT scores, they took less drugs, they had higher grade point average, they went to college more often, blah, blah, blah. It kind of, I walked away thinking, after having taught in the String Academy for years and years at this point, well, of course, because most of the string kids are from a higher socioeconomic level where it's really hard to participate in string lessons if you don't have a parent to drive you to a lesson. Violins and other string instruments are not inexpensive. Typically very successful string players at the high school level are going to have studied privately, which costs money. So all of these things I'm thinking, okay, well, what would happen if I went into an underserved public school where nobody there even knew what a violin was? And I went in and worked with first graders, and I'm particularly interested in first grade because I was lucky in Wichita, Kansas, to start the violin in the public schools when I was in second grade in a pull-out program in the public schools. So for me, that was that was the reason I play the violin, because my parents didn't have any experience with string instruments at all. And in fact, when I came home and told them that I wanted to play the violin, they were like, well, you can't play the violin. We're giving you piano lessons. Like, you can only study one instrument. And I must have bothered them a lot to get to participate in this program. But I was extremely lucky because they had instruments that they loaned you, and I was doing it during school. So it was just in my background that this is something that everyone should have an experience doing. And I also was looking at, for Fairview, in the first grade, the emergent reading process and its relationship to studying an instrument. So in particular, the way in which I teach the instrument at the school, which I'll describe here in a minute, is really important. So I talked to the dean here about this, and he was super excited and found funding for me almost immediately. And I had a partner in the public school who was very open to me coming in and working with the first grade classes throughout the year. So I spent about a year putting the curriculum together. I had a graduate student who helped me. I had a couple of students at IU. It was very simple to begin with. In 2008, we just did 3 small first grade classes. We were looking at reading scores that first year. I was thinking about this project as an effort to look at what was happening academically for these kids. So I was looking at, are they staying in school more? Are they coming to school more often when they have violin? What is the impact on their ability to take these problems that we're working with on violin? And these are kids who are used to failing already in first grade. So, we would have an instrument that's very complex like the violin. And if a kid didn't think they could do it, the next thing I know, the violin's on the floor, they're rolling around, they're crying, I can't do this, I hate violin, I hate you. The whole thing, is really intense. But to really walk through this curriculum and see that the kids were really excited about the violin at the end of that very first year, and even more importantly, their parents were very excited. When I came in, the parents were like, "Does my kid have to do this? What is this instrument? A guitar?" It was like these parents were not people who were raised on stringed instruments, except for maybe the guitar. There was a big change in the community over the course of that very first year. I added the second grade the second year, the third grade the next year, and so on and so forth. And I have about 25 students at IU who work with me at this point. So we teach multiple classes through the sixth grade. You can look online at the Fairview Violin Project. If you just Google it, you can see some information, and there's a curriculum and videos that you can follow to see what it is I do. I'm basically teaching general music with the violin in hand. So, Doug, I don't know if you had a chance to look at any of the videos, but, we do a lot of just basic skills. So some rhythm, we do a lot of eurythmics. We do body solfege, so the kids can identify intervals from the minor second up through the octave. We do a lot of singing. I teach only by rote through the fourth grade. In fourth grade, we start the reading process with the idea that they're going to be able to enter the seventh grade orchestra and be a part of that community. It's been a really wonderful ride. I will say that what I thought eventually I was going into to really look at and influence the Fairview kids and their parents and the Fairview community has been remarkably successful. It is a Bernstein Artful Learning School now. It's performing arts school. So they're every afternoon I think they have a choice of maybe 6 different performing arts initiatives that they can participate in. So the community has really rallied behind this violin project. We're one of 6 different things they can choose, which I think is, I feel responsible in some way for having set this up so that these children have these advantages. However, as much as the community itself has changed and got behind the violin project, I think it's almost impacted my Jacobs students and myself more, in the sense that I have a remarkable number of students, about 200 or more, who have worked for me over the last 12 years, who are out in the world working with underserved communities, many of them who write me on a regular basis saying, "I'm so thankful for having had this experience because it's really connected me to the impact I can make in the larger world with my music, whether they're performing, whether they're working with an underserved or urban community." There are many of my students who have chosen to work with that population in particular as they go into the workforce as teachers, which I'm really proud of, because I think that we need more great teaching happening for this particular population.
Yeah, that's certainly a remarkable program, and it's really cool to hear it now that they are more of an arts-centered school. For our listeners who might not be familiar with the program yet, I'll make sure to include some performance links in the description whenever we publish this. But anyway, the thing I was even impressed with the concert performances, including, again, those other arts components, even like some ballet dancers, and just seeing that whole integration was a really unique experience with students at that age level. Was really cool to check out. To kind of talk now a little bit with Fairview, kind of being around, is it a Title I school?
It is. It's
okay.
It's about 95% free and reduced lunch, so it's our higher poverty school here in Bloomington.
Okay, so if you could talk a little bit about that, because that is one thing that is unique, that sometimes is lacking from experience in undergraduate teacher training programs, or even people once they enter the workforce, even just due to proximity, because I even know where I went to college, it was the middle of Pennsylvania, so on each side of the school was cornfields. So unless if you have proximity to have exposure to that type of atmosphere, for someone who might not have much experience working in that type of setting, what are the main considerations and challenges that go into starting a program at a Title I school and teaching through there, teaching there for a number of years?
Well, I want to get back up for just 1 second, because I'm in Bloomington, Indiana, which is also surrounded by cornfields. And people are shocked sometimes about the level of poverty that is in this community. So I think I was. I mean, I had lived in Bloomington for multiple years before I went into Fairview. Fairview was a school that was often in the news as being a failing school, didn't meet AYP. It had all sorts of problems. And as I look at the data about this particular school, the turnover of teachers is very high. The experience level of entering teachers is very low. It's a hard place to work. Where you're working with a population that is quite transient. That was one of the major things that I was completely not prepared for as I went in 2008, was the number of students who were just not in school. And sometimes it would be because, they were moving quite a lot from place to place. I had students who were living out of their car, people in the homeless shelter, people who were at friends' houses for a couple of weeks, and they'd go and live with grandma for a couple of weeks. A lot of students whose parents were incarcerated. So it's a really, for the most part, unstable population. So that's one of the big challenges of being there, is that you don't have a group of students who enter, the first week of school and are with you over a long period of time. 1 year I did some testing of the students prior to their first grade entrance, and then after second grade. Even halfway through, I tested 45 kids before first grade. At the end of their first grade year, I had only 17 of those kids left. So there's a huge number of kids who come and go. So you can imagine, I think there were maybe 10 left at the end of the second grade year. So it's a revolving door. So that in itself is a challenge, because you have to build a curriculum that people can jump on board at any point. So I have kids who play the violin pretty well by the end of the first year, but I could be putting a concert on at the end of the first year, where I have kids who've been with me since the first week, kids who came halfway through, and then a kid who came 2 weeks before the end of the school year. And I have to somehow integrate all of these kids at whatever level they're at into the program. So that's, I think, a big challenge. The other challenge is, I think, as I said before, that a lot of these kids come to school not necessarily they're not in like with my children. I sent them to school. I expected them to do their homework. I expected them to do the very best. And if they were having problems, I always found help for them, whether it was from myself or somebody who knew how to help them. So I was really focused in on education. For many of the parents in this type of situation, they have like bigger problems. than what their kid is doing in violin. So, how to find good food or health care for their children. There are a lot of kids who have some health issues that need to be attended to, but the parents don't have access to good health care. They don't have access to good, healthy food, and they're just trying to get by, which is really a big problem. I would say that the drug problems in this community are pretty bad, and I think you would find that in any community throughout the United States, even the small, maybe even especially the small rural communities. We have a huge opioid epidemic here in Indiana. So a lot of these kids are victims of this because their family has been touched by it in some way or another. So to go in and to train students for how to deal with these issues, to really to expect and demand that these kids are going to participate. I've had some really heartbreaking kinds of things happen to me. I'll never forget the day a little girl came to me. She came into the class, and you know how when kids come into the class, you kind of get a sense of, is this going to be a good day or a bad day? Because sometimes they'll come in and they've had a sub or something's gone on in the class and everybody's in a grumpy mood. Well, this is a good day except for this little girl, and she looked really sad, and she was kind of, had her arms folded and downcast, and she came up to me as I was leading the class at the very beginning, and she whispered into my ear, "My baby brother died this morning." And I mean, my first reaction was like, well, crap. If your brother died this morning, why did your parents send you to school? Like, would you not take the day off to grieve and just be together as a family? And so it's like I was faced with a dilemma of, how to deal with this. And I said, well, I want you to participate in class today. I'm sorry about your baby brother. I want you to play for your baby brother today. And, she did. And to find a way to turn these situations around so that it becomes, music becomes something that's really positive. I've had a lot of kids who will tell me, I'll say, "What's going on? Why are you acting out? Like, tell me what's going on." And they'll say, "Well, I didn't sleep last night because my parents had a party and somebody was throwing beer bottles against the like they often sleep in one room places. So it's really hard. And I'll say to the kid, that's no excuse. You're going to stand up and you're going to do your very personal best today." And so to have empathy for the kids and where they're coming from, and there, for as many of these stories that I'm telling you, there are other really wonderful things that are going on as well. But to turn it around and say, "I know you can do this. I want to help you participate and do your personal best today," and to make a good choice. And to find things that are positive about what that child's able to do. And for some kids, it's just standing on their carpet square and not bothering people around them and holding their violin and trying to do a couple of exercises. And other kids, it's, the sky's the limit. So to be able to work with that structure and to pull these kids up and give them the ability to say, "I can do this, and I can withstand any number of problems and know how to solve them and approach it positively." And if I can bring that to those kids for 30 minutes, I'm gold.
Yeah, it's certainly remarkable what the program can offer the kids, especially in those situations you mentioned. And even to kind of touch on a previous statement where you even said it can change perspective when you first started, even perspective from parents as well and their attitudes, how that maybe shifted towards the end of that first year. So with this program now, having been in process now for a number of years, even aside from perspective of parents or students and how they view the program, have you seen any other outcomes from students when they begin the program to maybe half of the year or even up to the end of their study with the Fairview program if they go through all the way? You're
talking about the Fairview students themselves?
Yes, yeah, whether it be academic or behavioral or social.
I have not seen any, I don't have data that will say, okay, at the end of 2 years, those kids are going to have higher reading scores, which was kind of what I assumed was going to happen, because I don't think that we have in 2 times a week, 30 minutes class, the ability to change those types of things. I think that what I've heard anecdotally from the teachers is that the students are more able to concentrate. They're more able to break down problems and know that, that you don't get to the end result. You can't play the violin before you know how to put your feet. And, I have a whole protocol that we go through to get set up correctly. And so they understand that happens in math, that it happens in reading, that every task that they're trying to undertake at the school or in life, you have to start by baby steps and build on those steps. And you might not be able to do the end result to begin with, but if you practice those baby steps, you're going to get somewhere. So that's the main thing that I think they're coming away from. There's tremendous pride in being able to stand up and play a concert, and not only from the kids, but from the parents. And I've seen our concerts go from just this chaotic, massive free-for-all with people milling around and on their cell phones at the very beginning to my kids really training their parents and family members about how to behave at a concert. My expectations for these kids that they're going to stand up and behave themselves. And you've seen from, what you've seen on YouTube is that every kid there is trying their hardest. And they're doing the right thing. They're making good choices. And that doesn't happen all the time in the classes. But I have to teach them that, if you can't do something, the right reaction is not to throw your violin down and have a fit. But it's to ask for help and for us to give that help so that we can get everybody on the same page. I think also the ability to really work as a team, which is something that no other class does. Even if you're working on a sports team, you have your particular roles. If you're on the football team where you do this, that, but you don't have to do everything at exactly the same time, which we do in our orchestra and band choir classes, where in order for us to have a successful concert, everybody has to start and end together and hopefully stay together in the middle. And that's something that requires a lot of listening. It requires a lot of self-control and a lot of practice. And for them to be able to do that is pretty extraordinary. And they're very proud, and their parents and family members are really proud, as is the community.
Yeah, and it's really cool how that can bring a lot of those life lessons and all that into it as well. And getting back to those YouTube videos, the first thing that I even noticed, aside from the great music making for students of that age, just their ability to stand still, because even before I started teaching full-time, I was substitute teaching in elementary classrooms all the way K through 12, and I was just impressed to see a group of first graders stand, and not one is fidgeting or picking their hair or anything like that. So just to see that maturity of performance, but also on how they portray themselves on stage was quite remarkable. So now to kind of wrap up this part of our conversation with leading this program for several years now. Has it shaped your philosophy of education or music education in any way? Or to sum up even broader, with this experience, if someone were to ask you, why do we teach music in schools, what would you have to say?
Well, I think this is so interesting because because I'm a violinist, and I think about how you teach the violin, and you practice it. You get the instrument, you work on, how to hold it, you prepare your left hand, you prepare your right hand, you eventually put things together. And then I think about, how do you teach people to become teachers? And so many of my students have had a little tiny bit of experience teaching. Most of my undergraduates come in and they've either been the drum major, or they've been their peer leader in their band. They've had a really positive musical experience for the most part as a high school student, or somewhere along the line something's happened that's positive. But yet when we put them in these classes in undergraduate where there's very little chance to actually practice teaching, we talk a whole lot about how to teach. We sit in the class, all theory. We have teachers who have experience in the classroom, but who are no longer in the public school classroom for whatever reason, and they're in higher ed, and they talk about how to teach and what makes a good teacher. We build philosophies. We do some peer teaching, which you and I know is not the same as teaching a group of weakly little kids. And they're then thrown into the fire at their student-teacher semester of, okay, well, now we've talked about this for 7 semesters, 8th semester, you're going to go out there and you're going to do it. Well, I have a lot of students who, after 7 semesters, they get into the class and they're like, crap, I don't even like kids. I'm not sure I want to teach anymore. I think that this happens a lot, where they're not really sure at that point that they've made a good decision about their choice of degree or career. So for me, I think it's so important for us in higher ed to give students a chance to practice teaching from the get-go. So with my students here at IU, I don't have them do it in their freshman year because they need that year to transition into higher ed and get away from mom and dad and figure out how college works. But from the time they're a sophomore on, I apprentice them at Fairview, where through the generosity of the Summer Star Foundation, I'm able to pay these students to go into the class with me. I go 1 day a week and I teach the classes. We video the classes. I have graduate students who are veteran teachers who've been in classrooms for years, who've come back for master's or doctorate, who serve as my lead teachers. And then I have my undergraduates as the helpers. So in every class, I have a lead teacher and then probably 3 helpers. So those students get some hands-on practice working with real children. They get a chance to work in small segments to begin with. So by the time they get ready to go to their student teaching, they have had experience in front of one of the more challenging classes that they're ever in their career going to face at Fairview. So they have a chance to fail, which I think is really important because that's how you learn, is through your failures. They've watched me fail and pick it up. They've watched how I build the curriculum, and I've been able to work with them to help them develop as teachers. So by the time they get out there, they are really strong teachers. And I think for me, that's really the practice of teaching really needs to happen as part of our curriculum. And so more of these projects where you actually are building a bridge between the community and the university in instilling these real life experiences is really integral. So imagine in your band if you had, a connection to the university where you had several undergrads, grads come over and help you. And if you have kids who need some sort of accommodation, some differentiated learning, that you could send them off into a room to really work with this kid to make them feel successful, bring them back into your program. It would be awesome. Or even just to pass out music and to play next to them would be, something that's really, really important.
Yeah, certainly, and it's really neat to hear how, even in the instance of Fairview, how you are able to offer that differentiated instruction through that type of model, and that every student is guaranteed success. It's really great to hear, especially in that type of setting. So now on to some questions that we ask all of our guests, and you can put this in the context of maybe if you're in a one-on-one studio lesson, or in the instance of Fairview, or let's say if you were guest conducting with a honors orchestra somewhere. Can you talk about one or two of your favorite rehearsal tactics?
I think humor is really important. I think I have, I'm famous for my tattoo. I have a tattoo on my stomach that says, always start from the string. And I'm actually lying. I don't have a tattoo, but all of my students think that I have one. So all I have to do is point to my stomach and my students know exactly what I'm talking about. So I would say that that's one of the things that my students carry into their own teaching. I've had multiple students go into the field and say, I told my kids that I had a tattoo today, and they were like, oh, wow. Because you can bother kids about starting from the string, but if you make it kind of funny and interesting to them, they'll listen to you in a way that is very different. With my beginners, I do this whole shtick where I have two things. One is for the violin kids, one of the things that usually happens is that the violin droops down in front of their body, so they have what I call a violin beard. So I have violin beard shaving equipment that I pull out of my back pocket, which is non-existent, but I do a whole thing where I do the and shave off their beards. And so my little ones love that because, I could either say, oh my goodness, you guys, why are you still holding the violin incorrectly? Just put your violin over on the side of your thing. Or I can say, oh, it looks like I'm having to get my violin beard equipment out, and they all fix it immediately. I also do stinky shoe, where I just take my shoe off and hang it on the scroll in order to get them to hold the instrument up, because they like everyone loves to slump with the instrument. So that works at every level if you can get them to do the stinky shoe. So I like to use humor and find ways to get kids to do things that alleviates the nagging.
Yeah, I certainly like that with the stinky shoe. I need to find a way to do that with band instruments for my beginners this year. That'd be certainly good tactic.
Well, I'm sure you have a stinky shoe. So
where there's a will, there's a way, right?
Yep.
So anyway, now to talk about some leaders in your personal life or even in your career, which ones have made the biggest impact on you, and what lessons have you taken with them?
I think Mimi Zweig, who is she's my colleague that I've worked with the most through the String Academy, and certainly, like working with her curriculum, working alongside her. She's somebody who believes that anybody can do anything. It sort of comes from the Suzuki method. She also is somebody who really approaches all of her lessons with what we call a non-judgmental environment, where mistakes are good, mistakes are just information, and she's just a virtuoso at breaking things down and teaching really complex things in a very simple way. I think the second person is Cliff Colnott, who is a really wonderful educator in Chicago. He was here for many years as a guest conductor, and I worked with him quite a lot. And his approach to using language and thinking about how one says things to students and its impact on their ability to achieve has been really, really important. So he talks a lot about approval errors, the idea that people will say something's good, and it comes out of all of our mouths, like the kids play and you'll say, okay, good. And it's really not good. It's really like they need a lot of work. But being specific about what you want, giving specific feedback. I think Cliff is just a consummate educator, and I learned so much from him.
Whenever you think of an outstanding leader of a comprehensive music program, whether it be an orchestra program, band, choir, or whatnot, what 3 words would you use to describe that outstanding leader?
3 words. Motivational, energetic, and empathetic.
Great. So if you could talk about empathetic a little bit, could you elaborate on how you feel a music teacher should be empathetic, whether with students or even in general?
I think by empathy, I mean not feeling sorry for somebody, but understanding their perspective, understanding where they're coming from and why they're there, what they're hoping to get out of it, and then the motivational aspect is really the next thing where how are you going to motivate that student to get onto your team and really be a part of your program, a strong part of your program, and then finally finding the energy to sustain that program over the long haul is really, really important. And it does take energy to motivate and empathize with your students, and you have to care about why they're there and what they're hoping to gain.
Definitely. So, whenever you work with your undergraduate music ed students and as they enter the workforce, and you can even then put this in the context of any music educator out in the workforce now, what advice would you give to your students or even current teachers to help their students thrive?
Well, those 3 things, basically, like to help their students thrive, you have to understand who your students are and what they're hoping to gain. And then, I would say for me, and this I get from Mimi especially, is to be a lifelong learner. So I'm hoping to create a whole generation of students who go out into the world, and it's not that they have a limited amount of knowledge, but there's always something to learn and gain from other folks.
Definitely. So to wrap up now, whenever the time comes for you to retire, how would you like to be remembered as a leader for your program, whether it be at Fairview or even for your program at IU?
Well, they call me Dr. Mom here, so I think I want to be known as somebody who nurtures my students, who cares about them, who sends them out in the world and helps them make those transitions throughout life. And I have a lot of students who I'm continually in connection with as they move through the various transitions. And I want those students to feel that they could always come back to me as a resource. And I learn as much from them as they learn from me, honestly. So I'm a lucky person in that regard.
I like that. So with Dr. Mom, is that something they'll still even email you back and be like, hey, Dr. Mom, just started the new job. Your school year's great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So anyway, that wraps up all the questions then, Dr. Brenner. So I'd like to thank you again for taking the time to speak. Lots of great insight, and it's been an absolute pleasure having you on here. And I know people are going to love hearing this interview too. And again, just thank you very much for your time, wisdom, and insight.
It was my pleasure.
This concludes our episode. Many thanks to Dr. Brenda Brenner for sharing her wisdom and insight on teaching instrumental music. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to check us out on Facebook under Director's Circle, and to also subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. This is Doug Conrad saying thank you for listening, and be sure to tune in to the next edition of Director's Circle.